everybody, it's Gavin Linsell here for Gem Adventurer on Lootess. And today I'm joined by a very special guest, Billie Hughes. How are you, Billie?
I'm good. Thanks for having me today.
It's an absolute pleasure. Can you tell everybody at home a little bit about yourself?
So, my name is Billie, and I'm a gemologist at a lab called Lootess Gemology, and we focus on issuing reports on colored gemstones. So that could be rubies, sapphires, spinel, something like that. And what we do is we check whether the stone is natural or synthetic. We check if there have been any treatments carried out on the stone, and in certain cases, we even issue origin reports on that stone.
Great. Now, I was very, very lucky to attend the GIA, or if you prefer, the Gemological Institute of America's 111th Gemstone Gathering here in Bangkok, Thailand. And you gave a great presentation, Billie. It was really, really fun to listen to. Can you tell everybody at home a little bit about what you spoke about?
Yeah, sure. So my talk was called Journey into the Center of a Gem. And it was really about microscopy, which is basically looking through the microscope and the type of features that we see through the microscope. And I also went into photomicrography, which is taking photos of the things that we're seeing in the microscope. And so I gave people some tips on how to use the microscope, the different lighting conditions that we like to use, and showed some examples of the interesting features that we can see through the microscope.
Fantastic. Now, one of the great features that you, even the general public, can find on the Lootess Gemology website is your Hyperion database. Can you tell us all about that?
Yeah, so it's completely free and open to the public, and it's a collection right now that is over 900 images of the types of scenes that we see when we're looking at gemstones through the microscope and the different features we're looking for and what that can teach us.
Yeah, and there's a lot to be learned. But apart from that, they are also quite beautiful images in many cases and just can be appreciated for their aesthetics alone. But from a gemological point of view, why is a microscope such an important piece of equipment?
Well, what's interesting about a microscope is it's one of the only pieces of equipment that instead of spitting out a graph or some kind of data, actually to use it, it depends on the experience of the user. But I also think it's one of the most important and flexible pieces of equipment that we have because it can tell us all kinds of things about gems. Like, certain growth features, for example, can tell us whether a stone is natural or synthetic. There are other features that we look for that tell us whether something's treated. I mean, if I'm looking at a ruby through the microscope, by noticing some of these subtle differences, I might be able to tell whether that ruby came from Myanmar or whether it came from Mozambique. And so there's really a lot we can learn.
Yeah, and also too, we look at the different crystals of rubies, you can tell whether it's synthetic or whether it's a natural ruby. How do we do that?
Yeah, so natural ruby and sapphire, they grow as hexagonal crystals, whereas the synthetics grow in a way that form these curved bands. So if I'm looking in the microscope and I see angular zoning, I have a pretty good idea that that stone might be a natural ruby or sapphire. But if I start to see these curved color zones, then I have a feeling that that stone is probably synthetic.
Okay, and from a point of view of enhancements, what are some of the telltale signs, say, for example, that a gem's been heated?
So inside these gems, there are all kinds of tiny little inclusions. So there might be little tiny crystals. It's almost like a gem inside of a gem, really. But what happens when you heat these crystals is the crystals inside also start to melt. So instead of being like nice clear crystals with sharp edges, sometimes they get kind of a melted appearance where they look glassy or shiny. Some of them develop very small fissures around them. In Sri Lankan sapphire, what happens is a lot of them get this kind of frosty appearance and they become very round, and I like to call those snowball crystals because they look like little snowballs inside the stone. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and so really at the end of the day, the microscope allows us to learn about inclusions, to learn about growth patterns, and that's really Mother Nature's hallmark of authenticity. It's the very DNA of the gemstone. But from an everyday jewelry lover's point of view, inclusions can also add beauty and value. And a good example is asterism, or the star effect, in rubies and sapphires. Now, when did you go to your first gem mine? Because you pretty much grew up in the business, didn't you?
Yeah, so both of my parents are gemologists, and so I actually went to my first gem mine before I can even remember. I think it was someplace here in Thailand. The earliest mining trip that I actually remember was visiting the sapphire mines in Montana when I was 4 years old.
Wow, that's pretty impressive, because I went to my first gem mine when I was 32, so I'm a late bloomer. But anyway, I just want to close up by talking about your and your dad's great book on rubies and sapphires. Can you tell us a little bit about the book?
So this book is called Ruby and Sapphire, A Gemologist's Guide, and it's over 800 pages of information about pretty much everything you would want to know about ruby and sapphire. So we go into the history of how ruby and sapphire were used and discovered. We talk about more technical things like crystallography and the causes of color in ruby and sapphire. We also show different examples of how to detect treatments and how to detect whether something is natural or synthetic. And the largest chapter is actually the origins chapter, which is all about the different places in the world that ruby and sapphire come from, many of which we visited. So we actually show photos that we've taken from each mine and these inclusion photos of what the inside of a ruby or sapphire would look like from the different mines in the world.
That's pretty amazing. And also a great overview of all the different colors you can expect to see in sapphires. And for me, this is the best book on rubies and sapphires in the world. If you're a bit of a gem geek or just simply someone who is really interested in learning more about these gemstones, this is a great book to take home. Thank you so much, Billie, for coming in today.
Thank you for having me, Kevin.
It was an absolute pleasure. Bye for now, guys.